is how do we pay for the stuff that we might need to actually run a successful, or I mean a successful team. So my name is Gareth Angel. So I was a former coach at Langham Creek High School. I've also helped with national event proctoring for a variety of the life science events and at the state level as well. And right now I'm in grad school over here at UT. Just can't get enough of school, right? And here.
I'm Aditya. I'm a former captain for Seven Lakes. As a captain, I have to do a lot of like getting tests for my team and stuff like that. So hopefully I can help you guys with that.
So, how much does it cost? So this number is a widely variable one. At a minimum, there's a $220 fee as of this year for signing up a single team from your school at the state level. That pays for state and national registration. It also pays for your team to attend the state tournament. That might go up next year. We'll find out collectively in a few months. But usually it's not too dramatically different than that year to year. But there's a lot of variable costs. I've kind of posted this 3 to as much as you want to spend is kind of the number. I remember the very first year I started a team, it was basically like, we have $200, good luck. And we were able to field a variety of events. We didn't do all of the building events because some of them were robotics and we didn't have the infrastructure to support that. But we were able to compete in all of the testing events, all of the smaller building events. We were able to put together a substantial package there to actually have enough people to do it. But as your funding scales, you can get more competitive in certain events and you're able to kind of meet certain thresholds. Optional extras as well. There are invitational tournaments out there, one hosted by yours truly here at UT. And so fees for those invitationals usually run between $120 to $150 per team that you wanted to enroll in the invitational. So that's an additional fee that you would need to come up with if you wanted to do some practice tournaments before the ones that count towards your advancement to higher levels. And also overnight trips. So state competition is held at A&M right now. See, we might get it here one day, but we'll see about that. But overnight trips, that's an expense. So if you have to put up 15 to 30 students plus chaperones and coaches and get a bus to transport you there, that can add up pretty quickly. So those kinds of costs are something you have to keep in mind if you're talking about doing things in other cities. Luckily for us, there's a lot of local competition. So there is an invitational that's here. We have a regional that's at UT as well. So you could actually just go to that invitational, this regional, and not have to leave kind of the central area. So that could all be done within a day trip. And a lot of times, busing within a district or close to districts is a lot more manageable. Or if you're a homeschool team or a private school, you can get parents to drop you off within the local area. And we're going to go into a lot of detail about the specifics of these various costs as well. So things like building materials. Surprisingly, you need things like hammers and pliers and screwdrivers and saws, which might not be something your classroom is equipped with in a school. We also need, glues, testing materials. If you're doing lab events, you often need chemicals. And I know that's a particular challenge for some non-school entities. So some private schools have challenges there, and particularly homeschool teams. It's really hard to get certain chemicals. Surprise, they don't want to sell us random stuff that can hurt people unless you have some kind of licensing. So that's a continuing challenge for a lot of people. And robotics materials, a lot of that might have a higher kind of cost threshold than some people are used to. So we'll talk about some options for getting materials like that. But I do want to open up the floor a little bit to some of our experienced coaches out there. What are ways that some of the coaches out there have dealt with dealing with gathering materials or procuring? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So we were lucky enough to have a parent who was involved with, through their company provided grants. And so we asked our students to ask their parents to ask their work. They had work-based share of everything. We got a grant to them as a small grant. It's $2,000, $3,000 to us. Enough to set up.
Yeah. And that's kind of what's nice is we're operating this relatively low budget threshold for a lot of philanthropy. Still hard to necessarily come by, but if you can get it, it's a relatively small gift from there. Yeah.
I'm not, I'm interested. How does your, like, we didn't have to set up a booster club for this. We, I don't know of any problem with it. You're set up as a club on our campus. You can set up either as through the campus or as a club. Yeah. And you set up as a club, and I don't know if there's people under it. They didn't have to do anything extra. Are you the teacher? Can I ask also how you sorry, no. I understand. We lost our principal, so we're like, actually. So, for us, they ended up finding me a stipend, but I don't really exist on the district planning schedule. So they were kind of like, oh, you're science club. You get the science club stipend. So I get like $200.
Yeah.
That'll be for today.
Yeah. I will say we have had conversations with the secondary science director at AISD to talk about the ideas of stipends and ways that the district might be able to support teachers. One of their issues was it's challenging for the district to provide stipends because it's that amount of allocation, like who do we give it to, what are the criteria, do we give it to every school or not, how do we allocate that money? We have had some conversations though about an entity like us who can receive grants, potentially being the granting agency for the stipend piece. The district could provide material support. So that might be a way to have a discussion with the school that there may be a way that we can kind of make the funds move in ways that match their needs from an accounting perspective. Yeah.
Previously, I was in Spring ISD. Yeah. Spring ISD had a totally different process. They had the secondary science director initiated science Olympiad in all of the middle and high schools. And demanded it, which is how they would describe it. But they had a small stipend as well, but it was county code had it was the same stipend for every school. And so there was they provided some actual materials in the all set up. Typical science lab type materials. Different.
So yeah, that's the issue is every local entity is going to have its own little rules about how you can get this material, where they're going to pull it from. One nice thing we've seen now is kind of this growth in like maker spaces and in engineering opportunities at a lot of school districts at least. That sometimes those engineering groups have access to a lot of materials or even the tools that you might need to help you find something club. So you might be able to walk over to a shop, or if you're a school that doesn't have something like that, Austin actually has a lot of maker spaces that exist. That some of them you can, for a relatively small fee, have access to all the materials they have in their maker space. So that might be an option if you don't have power tools and all of the other kind of cutting stuff that you might want to make a machine. Maybe for less than $100, you might be able to access that maker space for long enough to actually do the work to build some of these. Parents though are a huge resource there because you might have that person that has their own wood shop, that has their own tools at home, that you can go there and find a way to get that done in a supervised way that meets kind of your safety requirements, but also gives you access.
Some specific ideas for special in Austin city limits, and there are a lot of tech companies in Austin who have philanthropic outreach. When I was in Houston, we went through the oil. ExxonMobil actually provided some of our engineering programs. But I would also suggest UTD has a grant. They're pretty liberal with their granting money.
You just have to apply it early enough.
Yes.
That one usually several months ahead. So now is the time to start thinking about it by fall. Yeah, and we're going to revisit the granting and funding issue because I know that's a huge piece of this. I just want to point out some resources I know that Science Olympiad itself has been working on. Is they have a partnership with Wards, and so Wards provides a slightly discounted opportunity to purchase specific material kits from the Science Olympiad website. And a lot of times, if you're a new team or even just randomly, they'll offer like 10 to 50% discounts as well on top of whatever prices are at the Science Olympiad store. So that might be an option for a new team. You're like, I don't even know what I need. These are kind of curated box sets that at least have some starting material. It might not be optimal. In fact, it probably is not optimal, but at least it's something to start with. So that's one way to kind of get your hands on a bunch of materials to start the tinkering process, and then you can figure out specific materials that you might want to add to those building kits. All right.
Can I ask, was anybody in here able to get anything for awards? Because when I called in November, they didn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
From last year.
It happened in time for y'all.
Yeah. And I know that's been a challenge because the event lists come out in September. Awards hasn't always, but I know that Jenny Kovac, who's kind of the new director of Science Olympiad, has been working specifically to try to get those front-ended earlier, so they're ready actually by the midsummer. They have a summer institute that's offered in Phoenix that they wanted to make sure those kits were available as well. So fingers crossed, and particularly returning events, but events are supposed to be front-ended a little bit earlier. I personally can make no guarantees of that, so your mileage may vary. Did you want to talk about this?
Yeah, of course. So for a lot of the flying events, like you have to make a right for elastic launch slider. It certainly looks like very daunting. If I just looked at something like that, I would have no idea how to do it. So for events like these, the best thing to do is to try and buy one of these kits. So Freedom Flight is the company that we're recommending right now. It's probably the best value and straight up the best device that you can buy. So if you're looking for for all the flying events like Elastic Launch Glider and Brightstone for the next year, what you would do is you would just buy like the Elastic Launch Glider or the Brightstone. And if it's at the beginning of the year, that's usually when things are a bit slower. So you should try and get it earlier rather than later, especially because the guy who's making them, it takes a bit of time for them to get them ready. So this is an exceptional resource for all the flying. All the even the best teams in the nation use these kits and small modifications. Roger, who's kind of our flying event expert here, will go into more detail about this during the balsa events, the balsa build events. But just know that this is a great resource for the flying events, especially because they seem like really hard. And also for events like Towers, which are balsa events as well. So for an event like Towers or Bridges or Room 11, there isn't really a kit for it. So you kind of have to buy your own. Now, you can try relying on something like the Ward Science kits, but let's say that you want to go a step further and try and take your So some options you have are going through this website, Specialized Balsa, or you can try and go to local hobby stores. So personally for me, because I was in the Houston suburbs area, we had a lot of Hobby Lobbies around. So I would just go to Hobby Lobby to get wood for a lot of this stuff. So now, when you go to somewhere like Hobby Lobby, there's going to be a lot of variation in the quality of the wood. So if you do end up going to Hobby Lobby, just make sure that the sticks of wood that you're buying don't aren't rotten or anything like that. Now, if you're really going to become the best after you've gotten a lot of practice, the specialized balsa is probably the best thing. But with all that stuff, it does come at a higher price. Now, with stuff like this, you can specify things, really specific things about the wood, like what type of grain it is, what type of density it is, what type of wood it is, all that. So this is more of an advanced resource if you're trying to get really specific types of balsa. But it is still something that's very useful.
And I'll say as a coach, this was one of those things that my students got very, very into. And I was very happy for them to be experts and just let me know what we needed and justify that for me. So, A versus B versus C grains and all this other stuff. I was like, thank you for telling me about that. Here's the check. All right. Protein modeling. So protein modeling is the event that keeps coming back. It's a partnership between the 3D molecular design company and they make these things called tubers. They're basically kind of a fancy wire that's surrounded by a foam kind of tube, think like a pool noodle, same kind of material. But they're flexible, and the event, since it's designed by them, is really well suited to these particular materials, these protein pre-builds, but they're not the cheapest version of this, right? So you can go to their website. They have them available. Science Olympiad has them available through their stores. You can also use pipe cleaner. You can also use just wire, all right? So there's a lot of ways to practice with these materials, particularly if someone's just starting on the event, without using the kind of, specialized material that has a higher cost. And a lot of times these are, once you've kind of used them enough times, they may be not reusable as easily. So I would recommend practicing with something that's a little less expensive just to get the concepts down, and then letting them kind of move into the more advanced materials.
So
Sure.
the other one, just clear what the website was. This company is Vertex.
The company here is actually 3D Molecular. So that very blurry issue up here, 3D Molecular Designs. If you were to type into even just any search engine like protein modeling, this will pop up as one of the first terms.
And this feedback are the best thing to get out
Was
of
the
protein model.
Yeah, I mean, they are really nice materials. They do work really well for the builds. So I will say it's worth the investment, but it is a price point.
You know, if these will also be front loaded here this year, because we actually ordered one in time for invitational films here
Yeah.
at UT. And they sent us last year's packaging with this year's paper.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it was not the right length, didn't have any right stuff with it. It was a huge pain to deal with that company.
Yeah.
And then trying to convince them that they sent us the wrong stuff was a whole other thing. And then they eventually were like, oh my gosh, we sent everybody the wrong stuff. Here, we'll send you the right stuff. But at this point, it was
So far in the
December.
season. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So I haven't heard specifics on this company for this year. When nationals happens, this is one of the conversations that occurs for the rules committees after they've had the competition. Is they sit down and the person from awards, the person from 3D Molecular comes to those events and actually has a conversation with the powers that be. And after that, so probably by the end of May this time, we should probably have more updates. But I don't have any inside information. Having dealt with them myself, I totally understand what you're talking about. And again, it's frustrating sometimes. I would say that the content they put out is great. The materials that they put out often can be delayed. So particularly when we have our contests like in October, that's really hard for a lot of these companies to turn around that fast. So yeah, so for that first one, if you have last year's version, you could probably still at least use the material piece. But yeah, you might need to order the kit and get something after. I'm hoping that they get better. And I know that's one of Jenny's pushes, is to make sure these business relationships are more streamlined. It's super frustrating, I know.
You know when?
Do we have a date?
October.
There's our date. It is, but it won't hurt October. It's still this year.
Our regional day is also decided.
What is
Yeah,
it?
February, the same, that same weekend.
Everything's just moving back, earlier. in the year.
Earlier, yeah.
Like Cyclops is always summer. Is that on purpose?
I know one of our contests or one of our challenges as a college is when you get close to Thanksgiving break, there's so many tests that it's really hard for us to get volunteers to run our tournament. And in December, we barely are in school for December, right? We're basically after the first week or so of December, there's no more students around to help. So that's one of our challenges for the college campus. Cy Falls, I think, wants to do this early so then they can actually be a team that goes to other invitational competitions. So there's been a growing kind of push to have some January stuff too. The issue I know at the state level is because February is kind of the beginning of the contest season, having invitationals after people have started going to regionals, the attendance is so low that it doesn't usually help happen. But we strongly encourage any team out there to run their own invitational tournament because that way we can have a greater variety of times and places. I know, space is a challenge too.
One thing that we asked
Mhm.
invitational that was open to everyone, regardless of whether they qualified or not. That was kind of our way of getting past the whole problem of like doing it in January. And also let team practice and they were out.
Yeah, and that's not a bad recruitment tool and retention tool as well, because I know a lot of times if whatever happens at regionals, like that's the last time you have a competition for the whole team. Exactly, right? So if you had one more opportunity later on in the year, it might be helpful. So funding, we return to funding. So school and administrative support. I know that can be a challenging lever to kind of pull, and sometimes, I know all schools are strapped for distributing funds, right? We'll talk a little bit about possible ways to help get your admin and maybe some sources that you could tell them about that they might know they can direct you. Booster clubs. Does any team out there actually have like an official booster club to support them? Yeah, so usually if you think about like an athletics club, it's usually like a group of parents, like a parent-teacher organization that specifically does fundraising and support to help out your organization. Yes, so they actually are generally incorporated as a nonprofit group itself that supports the school in there.
And they don't have to follow any of
the school rules. Yeah, so it frees up some space for them to do a little bit more.
We're a homeschool team.
Yeah.
We do have fundraising and we're successful.
Nice. That's really, yeah, that's huge. Yeah, so sponsorship, right, it's on my list for sure. Someone mentioned as well, there's a ton of tech companies in Austin. Interfacing with them can be a little challenging, but do you have any insights into how you got some sponsorship?
Our first sponsor just going in our lab. Someone was looking for a sponsor and someone sent them our way and they were like, oh, we really got a sponsor. And so we got more serious and we got 5 of them a week.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, so there may be some untapped
our level of
resources.
sponsorship is pretty low.
Yeah.
Can I ask, what do you provide back to them? Do you do t-shirts or?
And out like Twitter and all that kind of stuff.
I'm just curious because our district doesn't allow companies.
And we are non-profit.
Yeah, and I know that can be a challenge with the school rules about what you can advertise, right? I have seen some stuff though that if you can't put it on necessarily a t-shirt, but you might be able to tag them in Twitter feeds or on Instagram stuff, so you can find social media outlets that might allow you to give back to them, or even a non-school web page if that's a space that you are allowed to access. That can be a way to put sponsorship information out there that isn't kind of governed under these school.
ask everybody.
Yeah.
Send your kids to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The businesses are much more open to you walking in. When I walk in with my kids, it's like, oh, you got, but the kids by themselves, if you hang back, they're more likely to go. And everybody, I mean, we've had a pet food store donate to us.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a restaurant donate to us.
Yeah,
That's what you do.
But that's the hard part, right?
You know, what is Sebastian? My name's Sebastian. I'm with whatever Science Olympiad team. We really need money to get our stuff going. And tell them any little bit helps. $50 helps. $50 can buy a kit. Yeah, fundraising letter.
Yeah.
Ask anybody. Ask your pediatrician. Ask your doctor. Ask your chiropractor. Ask your dentist. Ask your eye doctor. We've gotten it from all of them. So.
Yeah, we had students just go to very local businesses. Like there was an auto mechanic repair shop across the way, and they were very interested in helping out us. They were like, "Oh, if you need access to some tools, we'd be happy to do stuff." Or here's $200 that will help your team. And $200 is pretty transformative, right? That's like a whole bus ride somewhere, or that's a entire event that we can now fund. So it's small amounts, but it adds up pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's invitational.
Exactly.
Also checked with RBFCU and A+.
Yeah. And I know you pointed out one thing with Exxon. I know a lot of the oil companies in Houston had matching funds, or they would give volunteer kind of credit. So if you had one of the parents or the children are part of those groups, if they volunteer to help out at something or do some kind of activity for your group, the company will add those hours and give you some money just for having them participate in philanthropic giving. Yeah. Yeah, we ran, I know Lane, we ran an invitational, but our volunteers were people that were working, that happened to have these matching funds. And so like the whole family came, thank you for doing that. So suddenly it was like an extra $1,000 added on what we got. And that was, that's funds for a whole year almost for a new team for sure. Another thing is, and we talked briefly about this, is we are trying to figure out how to get money into your hands. We've written for some grants, so we have a bit of funding that we could look at, particularly material support, or even this idea of a stipend that the district might match with material support as well. So those are some options. Our focus is mostly on new word teams because we're trying to start up new teams. And I don't know if you know about this part, but like Texas is woefully underrepresented in Science Olympiad teams for our population. So last year we actually lost one of our nationals bids because, and I know that affected some teams, because we don't have enough teams enrolled at the high school and middle school level. We have around 215 to 230, and California has 800, New York has 700. So equivalent population size is significantly less teams here. So we're trying to do our part of this in the Central Texas region to start new teams, which ends up helping everybody because it means we have more people that can show up at nationals as well. So,
I'll bring up one.
Yeah.
You said there are 2 invitationals in Central Texas. There's and the Hendrickson one for Division C. We need more invitationals. And if you want a source of money, I'm going to just throw Science Olympiad under the bus. The trophies and medals for a Division C tournament are $585. Entry fee for a tournament is $120. You get 6 teams, you've made back all your money. Anything after 6 teams is profit.
Yep.
So
yeah, the invitational that we ran in our school is the single best fundraiser
it's
that
the
we
single
did.
best thing we've done. We haven't got the turnout at the Houston because none of the Houston schools don't really like coming this way. No offense to the guys that come to Houston originally, but they don't like coming to Central Texas.
They don't have to.
Yeah, they don't have to. They have everything. So the more we can do here will help grow more programs. And I know we've got Vista Ridge going. I know Westwood started up. Anderson's getting bigger. We're getting bigger and bigger programs.
We built our program so that we could
Send your students there, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we need to get it going here too, so we have some. I mean, Dallas has no invitationals anymore.
Exactly.
So when
Green
Hill
Hill
died, there's no more
I came
tournaments in
from
Dallas.
Houston and I was like, there's
Yeah.
like one?
Yeah, and like,
There's-
there are people here.
Yeah, there's-
I mean, I don't have such resources at all.
But I think the coach perspective and the person who's actively involved in it is a great emissary, right? You know what it is to be in it at the moment and what the current
And what it
situation
does for your,
is. Exactly.
living in that high-tech capital, we have got, these are the kind of skill sets and the kind of education that our kids need if they want to grow.
Yeah.
Right now, AISD is really falling.
Yeah, it's good considering the AIC's had Lhasa for the only team for many, many years, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, he and I can tell you, running a tournament is probably one of the most stressful things you'll do, but in the end, it's a great fundraiser. Your kids get great practice working on it, and
And like our UT invitationals, those are run by our students. So they are Science Olympians. Like UT here was, buried under paperwork for days and days, weeks and weeks. But
Seven Links is running their own tournament, their own kids now too. I think Clemens is doing it. We did it at ours this year. So I mean, you can do it without having to get other coaches to write the test.
Yeah.
So that the coaches can spend their time with the team.
And I don't know, you guys can speak to this probably better, but my impression is, as watching students that get involved in running the tournaments, it dramatically improves their understanding of how Science Olympiad works, and it dramatically improves their kind of focus on how to actually be successful in this.
I also like not just running the tournament, but writing tests for a dramatically, because you start to see, oh, this is the way that you could frame questions, the way you could. And in my case, I generally write my test to attack my teachers. And so you start to see, okay, this is how I can cover myself. If I'm weak here, if you're weak here, I should probably be covering big learning. So that's another bonus. Not just a time sink, and it's not just a time sink, because I initially thought like middle school, like, oh, right. It's really also during events, extra study time, right?
I think our kids really benefited. The first year we tried, it actually worked really well. I think a lot of really benefited. Putting our right stuff down. Because you no longer write stuff down. Farmer writes stuff down.
So I want to jump in and give us a few tools maybe for administration or for even talking to other, especially education-oriented funding bodies. So Science Olympiad, the Next Generation Science Standards, NGSS, and the TEKS or TEKS, however you would like to say that one. Science Olympiad actually has documents that show the alignment of various events to those standards that are out there. So that's a good conversation to have with administrators, because if you can say, like, not only is this good just generally, but here is the specific ways that this aligns with the kinds of assessments our students will be held accountable for, or that are expected to be there for like college and career readiness standards that will help them in specific course alignment. That's policy speak, right? So that's a helpful thing to talk about. We know the importance of engagements and motivation for all of our student learning. And this is a great way. The way you see students working in classroom spaces, doing Science Olympiad, is what I wish they all look like doing all of their classroom work. Because they're engaged. It's something that is driven by them, that's motivated by their interests and their passions. Collaborative learning models, that's a big building piece right now. So looking at how this kind of problem project-based learning space that Science Olympiad sits in can be a powerful tool for helping students, particularly those who might not want to engage in kind of social learning, to find a way to actually reach out to others and start to work collaboratively. The other thing is you can use this stuff in your science classrooms. It doesn't just have to be Science Olympiad. I know experimental design is a really great tool when done in kind of a longer way to actually learn how to work on an experiment. What are variables? How do we do data analysis? So turning that from kind of an event into a lesson plan is something that can be put into. And finally, Title II funding, the one that nobody ever talks about, is for professional development, specifically earmarked by the federal government, and that there are actually ways to access that funding at the district level or regional level. So like Region 14 here has some Title II funding that you can potentially access as a professional development model. Like if you wanted to have Science Olympiad in your school and run, say, a PD at your school, you may be able to actually get funding to do that, which would more than cover, it could even cover resources that you use in the professional development, which then you use in your Science Olympiad. So that could be a way to kind of look at pulling down some of those federal dollars into it. Yeah.
I've heard of some of the better schools in Missouri actually have something like a full-on class elective.
So, yeah. Did LASA have a Science Olympiad class? No? Healing did. Okay.
Or if it allowed to teach something to make it a class.
You could. The hard push is always like, where do we put credit and is there a PEAMS number for it? But there technically is. There is a PEAMS number. I've looked up into this, but no schools don't want to do it because it's hard to find the space for a teacher. Yeah.
That's more than teachers.
Yeah.
And that's part of
So that's kind of a way to potentially find space during the day to do this. Because I know sometimes after school, the challenge to have students that can come because they're busy and transportation becomes an issue once you're out of the school day. So that's one time.
Band.
Yeah, band. I mean, that was my thing. I did not do Science Olympiad as a high school student because band. That was my life, you know. Also, GT support. This is a great thing for the gifted and talented space. And so that's one thing I've used with my director of instruction was this is a way that we can support our GT students in and out of school. There's also technically there's some funding at the state level. It's a little harder to get access to, but there is GT funding support that's available for, I think it's available for public and private and homeschooling. It's just working your way through that bureaucratic red tape to find a way to get at it. But you can potentially get GT funding for sports science. Yeah, sure. Yes, so from the federal level, funding has diminished for GT. And so they are talking about not necessarily funding it. We'll see how that flies because it's still technically earmarked at the federal level as a special population that requires intervention. And it actually does have federal funding still tied to it. So well, they're just down the street. Let's have a conversation. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. That's our lunchtime. Yeah, I think we talked about that. But so moving on to kind of where do we find stuff, not just materials like physical materials, but tests and other objects. Yeah. So these are the two major websites that you can go to. The actual Science Olympiad website, soinc.org, and probably seen that one, but that's where you find the Science Olympiad store. The test writers and the event supervisors at the national level, actually, I guess the ones above the event supervisors, kind of the people in charge of like all of life sciences, all of earth sciences and things, put together some CDs and resources, test writing materials. Those are good sources if you don't really have a slew of textbooks or other things. That's a good baseline for your students to engage with this material. It by no means is going to be everything that a person needs to succeed, but at least it's a resource bank that's a relatively low point of entry, not too expensive to buy into, and a resource that you can have for a long time. So it starts building your library of materials. I know they're still on CDs. We're working on getting them to make it downloadable. It's a pain.
It's downloadable.
They are downloadable. Their browser. Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna try to have a conversation about that. This May for sure. The other one, which I think you can speak to more, is this scioli.org. If you have not heard of that, you definitely should. You want to say anything about it?
So, have any of you guys ever used scioli.org?
Okay, good.
Awesome. So, for those of you who don't know about it, it's just an online forum dedicated to science. There's students, coaches, test writers, and even people from National Science Olympiad itself on it. So I think it's an exciting. So if you're thinking about it in terms of like practice with people, there's kind of two ways you can go about using it. Scioli.org has a wiki component and it has a forum. So the wiki is like, community-driven wiki where it has pages about every single event. And if you're doing an event like herpetology, it'll have like a table with all the different species and like some basic facts about all. So if you're just starting out with an event, looking at those wiki pages and looking at that basic information, there's one of the easiest and fastest ways to get started. Now, I want to be clear, like that information alone isn't going to make you really clear, but it is a good place to start out. So that's the wiki. And then the other side of scioli.org is the forums. And I think depending on how you use the forums, it can be something that's incredibly useful. So the forums, it's organized like any other forum, divided up into like study events, lab events, build events, and then there's threads about every tournament that's going on in the country, all the states, stuff about national stuff like that. So let's say that you're like put on astronomy and it's a very hard event for you and you don't know what to do. So you could just post in the astronomy thread and be like, hey guys, I saw this question on a test that I took. I have no idea how to solve it. And then some people respond and help you out with it. And it's a pretty simple idea, but I know personally for me, it was something that helped me. I was put on astronomy when I was in my sophomore year. I had no idea. So I remember I literally just spent a lot of time on scioli.org. On scioli.org, there are these things where different users on the site will write questions and then other people answer them. If you get the question right, then it's your turn to write the question. And just like a loop like that. And I remember I got in the habit of doing all these questions, especially for astronomy. And I think that was one of the things that helped me. So, because I remember I didn't know how to do anything when I first started. I was completely clueless. But then just by talking a lot on the forums and by writing all those questions and stuff, it really helped me become a better competitor. And on top of that, there are so many good people at astronomy on the forums. Like some of the national test writers were on the forums themselves. And then they would respond to your questions like, hey, I was writing the national test a couple of years ago and I had a question. This is how you would go. And it's having all those other people, you know, be so nice and encouraging to me is one of the reasons why I'm still helping out so much with Science Olympiad after I graduate. Because I think about like one of the guys I know, his name is Adam. He goes to grad school in New York. Like, that doesn't really mean anything to you guys, but when I was in my sophomore year, he helped me out so much with astronomy through the forums, and now I know him as like a friend. And now that I'm a college student, I try and have that same effect on all the other kids. So it really is something that's helped me a lot, both as like a competitor and as a person. And then, oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
So, okay, and then the last thing that you might be wondering about is, okay, I don't just want like information. I want a way to actually practice, right? And that's where the test trading and test exchange is at. So if you're looking for like just tests without having to do that much work, you can look at the silely.org test exchange. And if you're looking for the test that UT has at its tournaments, UT is especially unique, I guess, in that we release all of our tests from the regionals and from the invitational online on our website, and very few other tournaments. But we believe that, like, you know, not every team has the resources or the ability to come to every tournament. And even if a team doesn't come to our tournament, we want them to have like the ability to use those resources. Right? We don't want something like distance or money to be a barrier from something like, you know, being able to experience science. So if you go onto our website, atxsioli.org, or actually. Yeah, sorry. So then if you go to resources, here we have our tests from the regional. This is our test from the invitational. And then these are every single test and key and images and all that stuff in the past like 5 years, all in this folder. So there's like, I think like 6 or 7 years worth of tests just in these folders from UT Science Olympiad alone. Now, okay. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So if you're looking for tests from UT, you can definitely look at our website. And if you're looking for tests from other tournaments, you can go to silely.org, and then you can go to the testing. There's a tab in the wiki, and then there's also a tab at the top of the site. And there it has tests from all over the country, Yale, Harvard, all sorts of pretty spectacular. But let's say you want even, yeah.
Where's that? On silent.org?
Yes, silely.org. So right now, silely.org is in the middle of some site renovation, so there's 2 tests. And yeah. So, have any of you guys ever been to the silely.org test exchange? Okay, so when you look at the test exchange, does it look like a wiki? Okay, so there's that. So that's one of the test exchanges. And that's the one that you access by going to the wiki. Did you know?
Then there's the one, the new one, right?
Yes. Actually, I can pull that up right now because that's probably going to be a lot easier to describe. So, okay, yeah, so this is silely.org, right? So if I wanted to go to so this is the new test exchange. So if I were to go here, all sorts of stuff here. Now if I wanted to search like, okay, Yale. So these are tests from Yale's, but so this is the newer one that like, not everything is here, but this is one of them. And then, so where's the other one, right? So now if I go to Wiki, and then, okay, I'm just gonna choose a random event, and then, yeah. So now this is the other test exchange. So this is something where like you can just scroll through this, and you can see pretty like tests from years and years and years and years about every single event. So both of these combined probably give you a ton of tests for a lot of practice. So does anybody have any questions about these two test exchanges? Okay, so now let's say that you want to go even further than this, and you want to, what's up?
And one of the questions we have is, are there findings like actual tests for like game on or
Yep.
Okay,
A lot of those kinds of events, because they're build related or they're very specific at the site, a lot of people don't post their tests for them, and they're relatively new events. Not mystery architecture, but like game on.
It's so hard to find any resources on like anyone at that.
Yeah. You guys miss that?
So experimental design, we're gonna cover it in later time, but the thing with that is it's very, very heavy. And I think because of that, the ones we do find tend to be very general, like I know we look at simple experiments, but still get a good idea. In the past, what we've done is we kind of, when we've exhausted the resources that are already out there, we tend to kind of make up our own practice. So we'll find a simple lab or one that we think would realistically solve the competition. And then we look at what kind of materials we allow ourselves. And then if someone was to do that for us or we did that for ourselves, then we would practice that. And because there's a rubric, even if you make up the prompt yourself, you're graded on your ability to write that prompt. So someone can still realistically grade yourself.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a complex. In fact, it won't be a complex experiment because it just can't be. They don't have enough time to do a multi-step.
Those are tend to be good representatives.
They converse about that on Facebook. Like I don't know the background that want to support. But how do I know? Right, like figure it out. Yeah, I think even like you're saying, maybe simplistic code would just be
Yeah.
just the prompt from that year. That's tracked somewhere. I think it'd be really helpful. Parents who are trying to support.
I think the forum actually on SciOly is probably a great place to go. Yeah, so that would be a thing. You could just say, hey, we're new to this. Could someone help me with 3 or 4 prompts I could use for experimental design? And I bet you'll get 25 in a few posts because people really do want people to engage with it. You want to talk to the Facebook page?
Yeah, of course. So let's say that even though there's all those tests, you want to get like even more, and you have a bit more practice. So this is something that if you're a student could be especially useful for you because a lot of the time students. So firstly, have any of you guys ever done test trading? You guys know what that is? Okay, so just in case you aren't super familiar with it, it's like most of the stuff I talked about before is where you just like find tests online. You don't have to like actually interact with another person. So now a lot of the times what happens is like, let's say that, so we're in Texas, right? And if the tournament goes on in like Indiana or California, unless somebody posts it online, odds are I'll never see it. So this test trading stuff is a way to get around. Pretty much say to somebody like, hey, you're in Indiana, I'm in Texas. There's no way you can come here to like go to St. Paul's. There's no way I can go to y'all to go like whatever they have in Indiana, right? But we have like electronic copies, right? So I'll send you this test, you send me this test, stuff like that. So now, how can you get into contact? So one of the easiest ways is through Facebook. So on Facebook, there's a group of almost all the there's a group of like 500 or 600 of the Science Olympiad captains around. And within that group, you can just message whoever you want. Be like, hey, I noticed you're from like this school in this state. Are you interested in creating any tests? And most of the time they are. And then you kind of just like use normal human social skills to like talk about there's not really anything special about that. So I know a lot of like I know a lot of people do worry about that. Like, oh, what should I say? Like, is it okay if I say this? These are normal social. Not really that.
Yeah. So here's a guide for what to do if you,
Yeah. So like, now at the same time, like it's relatively easy to like talk with people. You also want to make sure that you're like, getting a good deal for your team. Like you don't want to make it feel like, oh, I'm giving away something really good and not getting anything. So how do you know if a test is going to be good for you? How do you know if like you're getting a fair deal, stuff like that? So the first thing I want to talk about is quantity versus quality. So obviously some sets of tests are going to be a lot better than others. Like if you have like a set of tests that doesn't include all the events or the tests aren't tab already, that could be a lot less useful than like maybe some like university like MIT has like all the events that are written by like super smart people and stuff like that. So some things are going to be really hard and high quality. Some of them might be not that useful and low. And when you're trading, you should try and make sure, like if I'm giving away something that's super high quality, you want to try and get back to super high quality. Obviously, you can't always do that, but that's something that you should try and do. Now, how do you know if something's going to be really high quality for you? Because that does depend. If you're like a team that's just starting out, getting like trying to take MIT like 50-page long chemistry lab test probably might not be that useful, right? So when you're looking for tests, you should also try and find stuff like that might be like an average test as opposed to like an MIT test. Now for the year, it's real. Most of the test trading that people will do will try and center around like the currency, right? Because that's when all the events are going on. But what you can do if you're trying to find more stuff is you can be like, hey, the last time that this event was around was in like 2014. You could ask like, hey, does anybody have any tests from like 2014? And a lot of people do. And then because those tests were from like several years ago, most people are willing to give those tests away. Like, hey, if you give me one like 2019 test, I'll give you like 5 sets of like 2014. That can be a really good way for you to build up the amount of tests so that you're able to. And obviously, not all of the tests in that 2014 are going to be, but even if like a third of them are, that's still more resources for your team. And because all this is done through the internet, it doesn't cost you any money, and you don't have to fly out to any of these tournaments to just get the experience. And then one last thing I want to touch on is that whenever you're testing, this is kind of like only if you're trying to like become more advanced and stuff like that. But let's say that you're doing a lot of test trading and your goal is to just get more tests, right? You might be wondering like, okay, I'm giving away this set that's like pretty good, and this guy is giving me a test that isn't nearly as good. Can I still do the trade? Now, you might think like, oh, it's not a super fair deal, so I shouldn't do it, and I also want to like not get taken advantage of. But the thing is, if you don't give them that test set, somebody else is going to give it to them, and then you're just going to have to find somebody else to get this set that they were going to do, right? And this isn't some sort of zero-sum game where like if you give away a test set, you don't have it, right? You're just sharing it with somebody else, so that way both of you. So even if you're like giving away something that might seem really good and not getting something quite as good in return, still doing that deal can be really helpful because in something like test trading, you just want to get more tests. You don't have to make sure that you're winning the deal or anything. Because just by getting another test, you're already benefiting by something.
And you wanted to point out for side falls that it's really early, right?
Yes, exactly. So I know we're running like 1 or 2 minutes over schedule, so I'll be really fast. But so because we live in Texas, we do have some very early tournaments. Like UT is very early, side falls is early. Now because of all of UT stuff is public, don't trade anything with UT because otherwise you just like hurting yourself, right? If somebody's like, hey, I'll give you UT's test, give me like Yale's or something, you're giving away Yale and you're getting something that's all free, right? So that doesn't help. But side falls is something that's very early and they don't publicly release anything, right? So that means that as a school in Texas, we're lucky to have side falls because it's something that we could realistically go to if we want. And then after we get those tests, we're like the only people in the country who have this. And there's a lot of demand for them too. I remember when I was test trading for 7 weeks, we would always use side falls like the thing that kickstarted our entire test for that. I would like contact schools from all over the country and I'd be like, okay, we have side falls. And then I would get like 15 tests just from having side falls, right? So side falls is something that's useful because they don't publicly release anything, but it's also very early, so teams are still looking for that. And then Rice is also something that's useful because Rice's tests, like sometimes they're hit or miss, but people think Rice and they think, oh wow, this is gonna be like super amazing, and they think Rice is such a good place, like their tests are probably super amazing and stuff. So a lot of the times people are willing to like throw everything at you just to get Rice. Now whether or not the tests are good enough to like deserve that, that's up to you. But like a lot of the times people will see Rice and they'll be like, okay, I'm gonna do whatever I can to get Rice. And that could be something that's useful to you because if you have the Rice test, going to Rice or talking to another team in Texas, then you can use that one step from Rice, get a bunch of stuff down the line. Do any of you guys have any questions about this?
People always been very hesitant with this before you even travel test. You know, like I know like before MIT like copyright are not released until after nationals.
Yes, so in the past that was the case for MIT. However, starting this year and onwards, they made all of their tests public. So you can access all of MIT's tests right now, even though nationals haven't, just on their website. So over the past couple of years, we've seen a trend of like especially like college organizations being more open with their tests and making them more public because they want to minimize the amount of barriers that students have to accessing.
And that's kind of a national agenda as well, is, the more resources that are out there, the easier it is for teams to start engaging with this whole process.
Has there been any talk at the national level of saying we're going to have a science must post them?
I have not at all heard that mandate, or even conversation about that. They really devolve a lot of that power to state directors. So it's state by state, you have a lot of different policies. That's about the level I've seen for them to mandate it. Yeah. So talk to Nancy and have that conversation.
Sorry.
So sure. Yeah. So our issue is who is the person that becomes Nancy, right? We need a human adult who basically is going to take on that job because it is, yeah, and that would be the thing, right? The key is it's to get the resources from the college. It has to be someone who's at least a staff member, or we have to convince the college to create a staff position to support that outreach, right? That's really the challenge. Is she runs not just Science Olympiad, but a whole slew of outreach things in the. And so having that contest between A&M and UT about who gets to have that portfolio is part of the bureaucratic issue. But really, it's like I would love to do that job, except that I don't have the credentialing right now from an official position.
I love
Yeah. Nationals has some ability to kind of appoint state directors. That's basically what it comes down to. If there were alternatives, then that could be something that could have that conversation about. Yeah.
And like there are other state directors there.
From what I understand,
I was gonna say it all boils down to it doesn't have to be an out, but like it has to be someone that has some sort of predictable longevity in the position and can actually be associated with the because I know there's a pretty young state director over in California who got his PhD and now at Caltech. That's where he operates out of. But you need to have someone who's going to be there for the long haul because that's the state director is also the CEO of the outreach at region as well. So for it to be a student or with people that like where there's a lot of turnover or with someone who's not officially let them access the outreach. Those are all the questions that boil down to.
Yeah.
So if we had someone at UT like that, I think it'd be very serious. I know us as students would definitely like to see state come to UT because we know based on the experience, like, oh, this would be so cool to do, or we'd like to do something. Yeah, so I think as of right now, there's no plan to.
Yeah.
So on the topic of the test, for us, the bigger issue is getting tests early in the season because so many national somewhat of a game of figuring out what schools are having invitational, some of the events, obviously the subtopics change from year to year. So are there, what I found this past year is I was doing better searching Google than I was on the Scioli site, simply because a lot of schools don't have, they post them someplace for themselves before somebody takes the time on the website. Are there other places that you have found access to some of those tests? Are there other, the Facebook group, the coaching list is great, I haven't put that in. Are there other places where people are having some of those conversations? Because we really, really scoured, especially early in the year. You and your one of the schools in Georgia were the only one who could find any test early on.
So I think that if your goal is to get tests as fast as you can, preferably earlier in the year, so that you can prepare. The Facebook group is your best. And then that's if you want to get tests from other people earlier in the year so that you have one. Now, if you just want other test sets that you wouldn't be able to get at other times early in the year, there's two things. There's Captain's Summer Exchange, which is run by captains through the Facebook group. It's like around 40 to 50 schools write 2 tests over the summer, and then they all put it in a Google Drive folder. And then if you contribute 2 tests, you get the entire folder. So then if you contribute your 2 tests, you get like 90 tests. So that's something that's over the summer. That could be, and so that can help you for the rest of the year. And then also there's something called Captain's Tryouts through Scioli.org. So how Captain's Tryouts works is if you're a coach or a captain for your team, then it's the same idea. You write 1 or 2 tests, you get access to the entire test. Okay? And then that happens in the early fall semester. That can also be another use. I think we're a couple minutes over, so if you have any more questions about the test stuff, feel free to talk to me anytime. But right now, let's get started.
And we're definitely going to have some opportunities over lunch to have some more conversations about all of this, as well as we're continuing on. So,
that's good. Yeah.
You need a quick break, stand up, stretch, and then we'll move on.
Which is fine. Just stay calm. And then stay conscious of the time.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid, like, just keep, like, if it feels like there's a bunch, it's okay to feel over schedule time. Like, again, like, it'll be fine. And, like, during lunch.
Hopefully there'll be lots of questions from this one because this is more like a we can cut down the whole discussion question. So keep that and cut that short.
I would say keep it and then keep it sharp. Okay. Like, slowing down like concepts. Like you don't have to sit on it. Keep them. I think it's useful to hear them because discussing them. But just keep an eye on it. And don't be afraid to cut it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm just gonna have to a little bit. I mean, there'll be.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, what cover is supposed to be? Yeah.
Ready? Get up. Yes, you did. Yes, he did. Other 2 days. Guys, come on.
My computer's still going strong, right? Nice. This looks so good. 4K, bro. 4K.
Yeah. Michael, wait, you got the 4K?
I'm just off to put it in the screen.
Oh, what happened to it?
Actually, it was my fault. But it was randomly turning off. The screen was the screen.
So they 4K'd you. Ooh, lucky.
So nice.
That's good. Yeah. Michael, you're not presenting anything. Why aren't you presenting?
Yeah, I wrote the. Okay, y'all, we're gonna go ahead and start the running a science Olympiad presentation now. Excuse me, we're gonna go ahead and get started with the presentation. For running a science Olympiad team, basically, for running a science Olympiad team, your speakers are going to be Gareth again, who's the former coach of Langham Creek High School, Alex Schultz, who is a former captain of the Liberal Arts and Science Academy, and me, Ashish. I'm a former captain of Seven Lakes High School. So we're running a little bit low on time for this one, so we'll try to end within the allotted time slot. So that might cut down a little bit time for questions, but don't be afraid to stop me. If we actually end up having like too many questions, then I'll tell y'all explicitly to just wait until lunch and Q&A. So the first challenge of any team is getting started. You want to have a good, strong recruitment, and you want that recruitment to stay strong throughout, several years in a row, before it becomes like that runaway effect where the recruitment keeps itself going. And so you need to have a few selling points for your team. One of the biggest things in Science Olympiad, especially for those engineering events that you'll see, is that you develop creativity. You need to be very judicious with your resources. You need to make things work with, as we all know, limited funds, especially with these engineering challenges. And these are such practical skills that end up making you a more attractive, college applicant, even a job applicant in the future. So, and of course, you develop good teamwork, right? You have to be able to work with people who are not like you, people who you don't like, and people who don't like you. And you have to work cohesively. If you're cobbling together 15 kids who like science, there's strong chances that there are going to be like some differences among them. But the question is, can you train your kids to bridge those divides? And the answer is yes. Over time, students in Science Olympiad develop better teamwork. So that's a huge selling point. And also, it puts yourself ahead of your peers, like you as a competitor, as a student. Even I'm an undergraduate, I'm a freshman right now. And there's still things that like I look, in the lesson plan of my genetics class, and I'm like, well, I learned this in micromission last year, so I'm gonna go a little light on studying for this year, right? So and even in high school, you find yourself ahead in the classes, right? So you might already be familiar with the contents. You might be able to ask more advanced questions to the teacher and really get a more meaningful experience out of most, learning opportunities. And of course, just building up upon that, it goes where the traditional curriculum doesn't. Of course, your high school curriculum is often going to stop before a lot of these like biotechnology techniques that you might see in designer genes and everything. So this really gives students a chance to expand their horizons. And some students, you're always going to have the students who want to put it on the resume. That's why they want to be in science. And especially in high school, because everyone wants to make, their dream college in California, whatever. And so it's okay to play to that. You can say, yes, it'll look good on your resume, but of course you only get out of it what you put in. So, you can't just exist in an organization and it mean anything. And especially if you were going for an interview later for a college, they're going to ask you what happened in this organization, and you can't talk about it because you were literally just a member in paper on the team, then it doesn't mean anything. So, and a good way to keep recruitment alive is to advertise in all the science classes regularly. And many of your schools will have school-wide announcements regularly. And it's important to announce your tryouts or whatever system you have in place, info sessions in these announcements, but also keep your team's achievements in the announcement. We at like Seven Lakes, we didn't actually do that much. So people didn't really know what we were up to. People didn't really know where we were traveling or what awards we were earning. And I feel like if people know that, hey, our school science Olympiad team is a successful team. They keep on going to all these invitationals all around Texas, and they keep on bringing back these medals. It'd be great for publicity, and it'd be great to get people excited about it. And Gareth will take over from you.
So logistics. As Ashish was talking about, club formation, right? Advertising, recruiting members. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I've found it pretty helpful to put flyers up, have your science teachers make announcements about this. But also we put together like a 1 minute or 30 seconds little advertising video that was a PowerPoint that we could play. And they were like, oh wow, that's so exciting. There's sound and moving things. So I want to go there. So your students are probably way better at doing any of that than you. So just let your own people who might show interest, if you have students already, have them build what is going to be interesting for advertising for people their own age, their peers. Because my main game is weak compared to most of my students. So I leave that to them. But from a logistics perspective, club formation, if you're in a school system, there are rules about what you have to do for your club actually exists and is official. You need to check in with your individual school and your individual district. It's also great if you have some administrator that supports you. It doesn't have to be the principal, but if it's, say, a science chair or someone up there with a little bit more, a little louder megaphone than you, they can really help push your club to being successful and getting a little bit more resources put your way. Required forms. So the nice part is, as a coach, right, the major issue is registration, tournament paperwork. All of our tournaments these days have permission slips that have to get signed. We're trying to turn that into an online form. That'd be ideal. Then you don't have to worry about Johnny forgetting the paper at home at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're trying to do this. Yeah. At least at UT, I would try to advocate for that for as many tournaments as possible, because I think we have the technology to do that. Let's move there. Okay. Or even just the ability to scan them and upload them, I think would be nice. So that's a great idea. Then help us sell that. Every time I do too, I was like, frantically counting 50 times. Yeah. Finances, we all know we have to maintain records of all the different actions we're going to do. That's another thing on the logistics end. Weekly team management is something that we're going to spend more time on in the slides. There are different models of how a team can run and function, where the leadership sits, how much agency you're going to give to students versus the coach, who's kind of in charge of some decision making. And that's going to look different depending on your school context, your group's context, and also on kind of the age group, for sure. Like middle school looks different than high school as far as who can do what in that event. And finally, tournament travel. There's a whole new slew of fun things that comes along with logistics when you have to transport people long distances and particularly have them overnight. So that's a whole nother game. And I have to talk about my experiences. I'm sure other coaches here have done that before, so their expertise will be useful to you if you're a new person trying to start. Yeah. So, team models. I know from our varied experiences, all of us have kind of slightly different ways about what does it look like to be in a finance. I know at Langham, initially, it was just whoever we can scrape together that was interested. We had a group of like 6 students that really wanted to do this. So we ran that team, and that's who was there. We couldn't compete in every event because there was just not enough of us. But those students really wanted to compete, and we did what we could. That transitioned over time to having 45 students that wanted to. So suddenly, it wasn't a matter of do we have enough, but how do we manage having too many people participating? And so that led us towards some selection processes and ways to kind of manage who got to be on what levels of team, who was doing what events. But a lot of that was kind of a nice hybrid model between myself as coach, trying to make some final decisions, but having lots of kind of officer for student input, because they knew their peers well and also had experience in the events to know what personalities might gel in the team, but also as the responsible adult, kind of overruling some of those peer effects that might pop up that could become a little ugly. I know other teams have very different experiences. You want to talk about, or either of you, about your?
Sure. So at Seven Lakes, we had basically a parent-student hybrid. This had evolved from what we had at Beckendorf, actually. A lot of our parents would sign up for like an event or something, especially one that they're on, kid was doing, and they would learn a little bit about the event and host little practice sessions for like maybe 4 kids. So that was the main extent of our parent involvement. And also, we tended to have a lot of parents follow us to invitationals and regionals and everything. That's actually very important in my opinion, because it shows support for the students. And it also helps, especially when you're in middle school or any division schools. Okay, yeah, great. So like in middle school, kids are always getting lost, right? They have no clue where they're going, right? And they don't know how to read or orient the map.
That's true for high school too.
And it is honestly true for high school because it is true in middle school. So parents can often help these flustered kids coming out of an event with only 10 minutes to find their next event in a school that is 3,000 times as long as they are tall, and get to their next event on time. So that's really important. And parents can also be a good influence on team culture as long as they don't go too far. And that's a little bit the next slide is about. Alec, you can talk.
Yeah, so then LASA took a more student-led approach where we didn't allow parents to have any say in the decisions that the team made. And they did not come to tournaments with us, and they basically stayed as like they were not part of the team because we had so many issues with parents trying to interfere with team selection processes that we made purely based on like a student basis. Students for LASA, we did all of the leadership stuff, we did the logistics, so we signed everything. We like got all the forms ready and just had it brought them to our coach and like, okay, sign here, 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 and here. And because we were trying to make it so that we could do more tournaments faster, and it was all student run. It was a really nice thing because it gave a lot of leadership experience to the students that were part of that leadership team. But of course, there were sometimes things that slipped through. But I think it was overall a positive experience because it gave the students a lot more like ownership over the team and what they were doing.
So either way, like, a couple different approaches here. Y'all know your parents better than we do. So you tend to have like clingy or really interfering bound parents, and I guess a model with less parent involvement like LASA would be more beneficial. But either way, there are a couple of guidelines we can probably follow for parent involvement in general. Personally.
And I think this is kind of follows from kind of experience as a teacher. What is the boundary space between what's going to help the student actually have their own growth, but also have parent support that can be part of it. And so boundaries are important. Whatever that boundary looks like for you, having clear establishments of like what is the role of parents, what's the role of students, the role of the coach in your organization, and spelling that out clearly and repeatedly will really help mitigate, I think, a lot of these issues. I don't think any one model works perfectly. It's just really what's going to work. And it might shift over time as you get new parents in, you get new students, new coaching, staff turnover as well. But just making sure that everyone knows how they can help and what areas they're not going to be involved in is going to be the most critical. But of course, all of these things are stuff that parents can assist with, right? So it can be as far removed from day-to-day decision making as you want, but it can totally be chaperones. I know if you're going to take 30 kids somewhere, it can't be one coach. Usually at least one other human. If you're having district rules, ideally more. If it's going overnight, you need even more people to support that because now you have to worry about who's in what rooms, who's going to be sure that everyone's where they're supposed to be. Fundraising. Parents can be a huge asset on fundraising even if they're not directly involved. So definitely use parents. Make sure you know where the boundaries are.
Yeah, and adding to that, like content coaching is a thing that parents can be amazing for. You should ask your students like, hey, does anybody have a parent that's like willing to help with engineering, especially? Because sometimes like you'll have a student that has a parent who's like a professor in the engineering school and they've just never talked about it. They're like, oh yeah, my dad's just an expert in this. And it's like, okay, that's a very useful resource. And if you can leverage that to your benefit, it can do amazing things.
28 events, no one person. Yeah.
I'm curious if any of you have examples of these kinds of roles written out that you use function from your team. And I'd like to see.
You guys have any documents that you can?
Actually, we once had a parent meeting where the parents may have made a document. That was at my house, but I was did not want
Just
to
anything
actually go
We're
to
not
the
part of
party.
it. That's actually a really good, that'd be a good resource.
I can ask about that.
So
for you.
I can actually, I'm not really sure if anybody, I have some stuff that I'm trying to like, I'm trying to put together stuff in our district.
Yeah.
So I did a PD development and I just took everything that we do, which is far from perfect, but gives a starting point and made documents to try to explain it. And I'm looking for kind of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back, and now it's been a while since I was in that coaching position, but we definitely had like a club constitution that the students and I wrote up that spelled out all of these rules. And I will dig into my own files and see if I can find it. But if anyone does have stuff like that, we would love to see versions of it if you wanted to send it our way. We could curate some of those, kind of redact what schools they might be, so that way it's not, identifiable, but at least put maybe compile them into some general models. That would be huge. Thank you for that. Okay, so team selection. So how do you figure out who's going to do what? If you have 6 people, it's whoever you can find, right? If you have more, it becomes a little bit more complex process. So you two want to talk at all about that?
Yeah, sure. So, does anyone have just any prior experience with maybe an unorthodox or just any method at all that y'all use to decide which students get events? Because that can be pretty contentious. Yes.
So I have students create a list of what they want,
Mhm.
and then we do rounds, we do picking rounds. And so
The draft.
the first round is based on a ranking, based on their tryouts or whatever I'm using as a ranking. And so the first round, we go with whoever scored highest gets the very first choice and go down. And then we go to the next round and it's a random round. And I just pick a name, they get the next thing that they had preferred until all the spots are filled. And at the end, you always have one once. And so you just start plugging in people to choose.
And how does that work? The random assortment part of that is there any hacks?
Literally, I take their names and put on it.
Okay.
I also usually have 2 teams. So I have to decide who's A team and B team, and invitationals, I don't. I just randomly assign them. It's regionals, obviously, but I do, that way I do separate processes.
The other thing you don't have up there too is schedule conflicts.
Yeah.
So
Huge
in
piece.
Schedule conflicts, yeah.
schedule conflict has been, okay, I've got my top guy in this one, but he's also the top guy in this one, but they're going at the exact same time. So now that guy's gonna out. You gotta figure out who's gonna go where based on that too.
But it sounds like at least if you were to use a system where there was a prior ranking or something, you have some sort of a depth chart, right? So
We do the invitational performance, and then we go down to the conflict.
Yeah.
And definitely don't let
Yeah. How do you do the invitational?
invitational, we don't care. We just let them kind of go like we did. It doesn't matter. We're not there to win invitational.
And then you use the outcome of that to help you.
Yeah.
further.
Yeah, and if somebody can't go, because you said it's, I don't know if you guys have it, Olympiad definitely didn't, suddenly my band.
oh yeah.
4-letter word.
Yeah.
4-letter word.
Just at the same time as all
Oh,
of
okay.
It's always in that qualificational, so then that's what you're saying, if we can get the test back, then we can give those tests to the kids that couldn't go to the band, then we can see how everybody performed, and then you can rank them later on. But yeah, we don't worry about putting the best of the best on each one.
Well, the randomization also helps with figuring out which area students work best together.
Yeah.
Because individually they might perform well, but when you pair them together, they perform even better. And without randomizing our teams, we don't really.
Know who works best together. And
Really
we have
figure it
we have one of those last bullet points this year. So
We had a
Yeah. Oh, I see.
science board team just got thrown together and ended up performing amazingly. So we had to keep them together regional and
Something that we did when we were looking at choosing our team was we would look at the invitational performance and we'd actually take the tests. We'd have the students go through and say, these are the questions that I did and these are the questions that my partner did. And then we'd take those tests and we'd give them to other people on the team. And we'd try and get everybody that was interested in the event to take that test. Then you see who your best person is on knowing this information and who your best person is knowing this information. And you're trying to get people that don't have as much overlap, but together can cover the whole test to a very high depth. So if they were paired together, they should be able to get a perfect score on this test. So if you take those people, you can like a lot of the time you can make partnerships that are really based on just pure facts, and a lot of the time those people will be able to work together really well because they are so interested. What's up?
I also was.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about that when we start coming to like the team culture part of this presentation. That's so important. And honestly, I have my own personal anecdote about a mistake we made with one of those selections in the past. So that's a very good point. And that's terrible for team culture. Yeah.
And one thing, I mean, the scheduling issue is continual. I know one thing that we've tried to do, like for our invitationals, make sure we're aligning to the national schedule. So at least the conflicts that exist are the same conflicts that are there at nationals. State has not done that recently, so that doesn't necessarily make our tournament align with theirs, but that's one other issue.
She did better this year, but that was after I think a bunch of us yelling at her. So.
Yeah.
Thank you for your continued input.
I think that's a very good job. So, I think we're gonna move on a little bit here, but just to sum up, some main points. Of course, objectivity is key, right? So the more number, like I would say, random generation works, right? There's
At the beginning,
because there's no like
no baseline.
there's no baseline, but there's also no like, partiality that you're showing to anyone. And of course, you don't let the parents get involved. Especially some parents try to leverage their position as like the go-to parent who like wants to get in all up in your forms and help you out and plan trips and stuff. But that doesn't mean that they have any more right to have little Johnny in it. So and then ensure the team will be cohesive and get along because that's the most important. So member assessment is something that at least we had one responder say that their team was doing that from like the tryout test, but at least what Seven Lakes used to do is to do these tests periodically. Besides just assessing their competition performance, which was a theme that I heard from you all as well. So internal testing was, of course, Vidya mentioned earlier where to find these random tests from the internet and stuff. So administering those tests in an environment in school, maybe you call it like one day, everyone stays for a 2-hour practice or something after school. Everyone takes 2 tests, and we start ranking how people are doing on these tests. And that can serve almost as like another invitational with a more controlled environment, right? There's not a lot of stress. You can see how much people actually know. Yeah. At Beckendorf, it has happened in the middle school level. I personally don't think it was super necessary back when I was at Beckendorf. We didn't do it at all. At Seven Lakes, though, it was as I progressed, as I got older, we started doing this more because we realized, of course, it gives us more numbers, and that gets us back to the objectivity part. You can't argue against a test result. Yeah. So then you have to check in regularly with members, not just on like how they're actually studying for the event, but how they feel about the event. Sometimes someone may not be too vocal. We often have some elements on our team who would be in bad situations and confide in other people, but not the leadership. So leadership finds out about it 3 months afterwards that person didn't want to be on that event the entire time, and they weren't applying their best in it because of that. So, and then potentially see how they do on these test offs, and we talked about where these tests come from. That Facebook group and everything is so important. And it's important to do internal testing separately if you do choose to do this option because it differentiates 2 partners who are on an event. And that helps the tough decisions when you're deciding for a regional or a state team. Because say these 2 kids are getting first place in meteorology every time, but you only have space for one of them on the state team. Who's actually better? And then what about build events? Build events you can't really sit down and take a test for, but you can have your team members. What we did is we had them send in build reports, which are detailed lists of everything they can possibly write about their build, where they are now, their future plans, any videos, build logs and stuff. And the people who have the more like comprehensive, well thought out design and plan for the future, they tend to be ranked higher as builders for a specific event. And builders do usually have leads and stuff.
Yeah, and what LASA did was we had one captain that was designated engineering captain. And their whole job was basically to sit down with everybody that was trying to do engineering and make sure that they had the resources they needed to do these builds, but also to do these like chats. So they would come to you whenever we had these like evaluation sections, and the engineering captain would sit there and have the device explain to them in detail, show any like drawings that they had, any actual plans, and then ask questions because we don't want to punish people for having a longer term plan, but we need to make sure that that plan is feasible and achievable. And so we had to do a lot of like personal looking at what they're actually doing, because we found that our build reports that we were getting, some students were just better writers, and they would come through and you're like, oh, this sounds great. Yeah, it sounds great, but that device might not actually end up working.
So again, the test off strategy, you could have a results sheet like this, but I would never release something like this to the team, because the question of raw scores, we started to realize that if you give students back their raw scores on these tests that they do to compete against each other internally, then maybe someone who is 30 points ahead of second, third, and fourth place starts to think they're really good, and they get complacent, right? So then eventually that person becomes less effective as your lead on that event. So it's important to keep everyone guessing a little bit as to how much better than someone else they actually are, just so that everyone stays competitive. So for overall team assessment, right? We've talked about member assessment. How do you know how well a member is doing? But how do you know the health of your overall team, right? So you see after an invitational or regional, you get the score sheet, and our eyes automatically gravitate towards the lower placing events, right? And we see that these are areas of improvement. And we, as captains and leadership and coaches, it would be good to pull the students aside separately, right? Not when they're in that huge crowd of people around the score sheet right after it gets handed out, and talk about what went wrong, especially if it's a chronic problem, because some of these start showing back up, especially with some of our build events in 7 weeks. We always used to see, why is this breaking every time? And sometimes it was just students were like experimenting with some design concepts that they thought might work, and they were being a little bit ambitious, when in reality, going with a safer design that didn't have such a high potential would have gotten them a higher place. So there's some optimization, and often as a coach and as an adult, you probably see that a lot better than some of your students. And stagnancy in results can definitely lead to frustration in a team. Of course, with those build events, and it's important to be there from a counseling perspective to help students do that, because sometimes it's just not their fault. Sometimes the proctor runs something badly. Sometimes students have actually made some significant improvements on their build, but the proctor didn't line up the tape correctly for their electric vehicle. The path was marked wrong on the floor, and things can mess up, and that can lead to stagnancy that's completely artificial as well.
Yeah, and another thing for the engineering events, it's hard to be like a lot of the students that are going to be doing that. If they're seeing the same results every time, or like they'll come with a robot arm, it breaks one competition, they have it perfect for the next one, and then they plug it in, and then it gets a surge and fries the whole board. We had that happen. That student was just like crushed. And that's something you have to like support and show them that like, we understand that you're making a whole lot of progress and we want you to do this. It's like okay to not have it work perfectly every time.
And the converse is true as well. A lot of times, particularly for the early invitationals, the competition that you're against, no one's really had time to test a lot of their devices. So because you got first place at, say, our invitational in the very first opportunity anyone had to test anything, does not mean that in 3 or 4 months, you're still going to be. So high scores as well as low can be anomalous. And you are looking for trends and patterns, not one-off. Yeah. Sure. So, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about that more in the engineering. Yeah.
So it's gonna. Yeah, it's gonna vary based on the individual event, because building events, there's certain parameters that tell you what the score is. Most tests it's out of 100, right? But really, you're saying place is how your team scores. So it's first, you're trying to minimize your total place score. Right? So first place gives you 1 point, 15th place gives you 15 points. You want the lowest score to win.
But
Yeah.
like, if you're testing at home, like for whoever, like, what's a good score? Like, or for like the vehicle, and for we've got your number, like, what are,
Yeah.
what are the teams that are winning?
Why don't we save that conversation for those
Engineering
events?
events.
Yeah.
Because it is really specific to those ones, but
Yeah.
I think that's an important one. You have no metric.
Yeah.
You like how
I have a question for you guys, for keeping the engineers motivated. It's like, beginning year, they get the real permission possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do this. And like you're saying, here's all this design, here's all this stuff. All right, build it. Show me what you got. Let's
Yep.
see if it works. We know each step is worth so many points. You know, and then 2 months later, there's a box.
Yeah.
That's empty. And
Yeah.
then another month after that, there's still an empty box. And then, oh wait, we're going to UT, and okay, we'll throw in a start and a stop. Like, how did Seven Lakes or LASA deal with that, for lack of a better, apathy amongst the engineers?
Yeah.
Not getting stuff done, so like tonight, we won't even discuss hovercraft last year. That just sucks.
What would you say?
So I'll talk about that a lot more in the engineering section. We had the dedicated engineering captain who just kept on coming to the engineers and just going, look, so what step are you on? I need to see progress so that we can make sure that this device gets done. Because like each of those events that, though they might say, hey, it'll take me a week, that event matters just as much as the kid who's been working on something for months.
So it's like when you're going to the night, it's
Yeah.
like traveling to Houston, going the night before Rice,
Yeah.
they're still putting the final touches on something. It's like,
Yeah, and
no,
also,
why is this not done?
Yeah.
I mean, I know as a coach one time I had to just take the 0 and a no-show for one event because that person had failed repeatedly to show any progress.
Yeah.
The consequence was, we are not going to enter this event if you're not done by the week end
Yeah,
before.
we've done that
It
too.
wasn't.
Looking for
Like,
ways to
sorry,
motivate the
this is just-
engineers
Yeah.
more to get them moving. It's
Yeah.
Like I've had
Yeah.
my engineering captain screaming at them almost.
Yeah.
yeah,
And they're still,
And
Yeah.
that's hard, right? And it's true for studying events too, but it's more obvious, I think, when you have a physical object. It
yeah,
doesn't
it's more obvious with that. That's what the loss or Seven Lakes do with that.
Yeah.
For Seven Lakes, we benefited from that internal competition a little bit.
Mm.
We started making our team size, our total team size, a little bit larger than 30 or like the 2 teams that we wanted to, so that there'd be some competition to get onto the event. So we would of course want these build reports, right? And someone with a more advanced build report would be seen more favorably to actually go to the tournament in the first place. If you don't have that critical mass, then still it's important to check in with people's build events well in advance, because it seems like the problem is finding out that there's only a box just 2 weeks out from the tournament. And it's like, well, there's an event as heavy as
It's
Mission.
more like 2 days. I know what's going on. I'm bugging all of them to get it going. This is still nothing like Boom Lever, no big deal. We've had 10 people building on Boom Lever this year,
yeah,
and they test them. Every other week they have to bring in the design and test it, and they start going off of it. Like something like Mission, where you've got to put so much effort into that box, you can't really have 3 boxes.
You could say, bring it in, and this is how I would troubleshoot that if I was still captain. I would say, bring it in, and for 2 hours it's going to be us captains, especially if they had like a build captain, sitting with you, and even if we're not putting stuff in the box, we're brainstorming ideas, and then we're making a timeline for what needs to be done when, and we're going to be checking up. Right, so a timeline with checkpoints gives people more of a sense of when they start to fall behind as well. 3 checkpoints behind.
How did you guys hold them accountable?
Well, for us, we did everything. We took a slightly different approach than that. We took, for like Mission especially, we designed a modular approach, and then we had students work together on that. And so like, if you didn't finish your module, your friend was going to get completely like, they weren't going to be able to work on it. And that accountability between the peers on the team, and you'd have like somebody that'd be like kind of annoyed at this other person if they didn't finish it. And that like internal, basically peer pressure made them fix it because they didn't want to be that guy who was like, oh, I'm 5 weeks behind. So it was a lot of like build checkpoints, designing everything in like small sections that could be assembled later, and keeping everything to very like concrete, achievable tasks that then you can move on to, that when they all come together, you get this final machine. So like something for UT, sometimes that device honestly might not achieve the complete task.
I mean, some for UT, I'd probably looking for start and stop.
Of course,
Actually,
of course.
but, like,
And-
for the next one, I'd like to have a start and stop.
And something in the middle.
Right,
Yeah, and
that's
so
what
it
I
was
kept trying to
just,
drive with them this year, but, like, the accountability wasn't there amongst them. We kept holding deadlines, like you need to have this task done by here, figure it out, and then when we tried the modular design too. and
I would say
One
just,
way-
yeah.
One way we addressed kind of really for state last year. You're not helping your teammate. Sebastian knows exactly. Anyway, but, I mean, that showed the team,
There are consequences.
you're not next to them.
We've done that too. We've had ones that haven't done what they're supposed to do. They're like, well, I'm the best on this event. Too bad, you're not going to state.
I have a question that you may end up addressing for all, for event. I'm interested in like overall timeline every year as a goal, not specific, but I'm like, oriented, if I were to tell, you coaching, right? Here's what the year looks like, here's where ideally, like, have many tests, or like do a sample test.
I think it varies by team, right? It depends on the invitationals y'all are going to, because those can be used as checkpoints. We want to be like, by this invitational, we want to be this far. By that invitational, we want to be this far. Another huge checkpoint for my team was always winter break, because winter break is so long that we say that, if no matter what you look like before winter break, we want you to come out of winter break like this, because regionals is in such a short time, and January, February gets eaten up so fast that you blink and you're at regional, and your box still looks the same as it did. So we like to push deadlines like that, and it depends event by event as well. It's more logical to make checkpoints for a build event than for a study event. But yeah, we can get to that, especially in the separate partition
And
sessions.
I've generated, at least, here's when these different things happen, like here's when an invitational is going to occur, here's when regional is, here's when state would be. And it's almost, there's monthly events, essentially. It's kind of like, register in September, first invitation in October, second one in November. December, you kind of have a breather maybe, or you can go to a third one if you really want to. January is like less crunch time, and then February, March is when all the regionals are. So pretty much month by month, better to making forward progress. You're missing out.
So I do want to move on, so I'll just wrap up this slide real quick. I'll say, again, our eyes gravitate on that score sheet towards the worst scores, but it's also important to recognize and reaffirm the best scores and the ones that are improving, right? Those are less obvious, but students need to know that, their hard work is paying off. That's what leads, the feeling that hard work is not paying off is what leads to the frustration that comes from stagnancy. But, encouraging the students whose work is increasing their placings and stuff is huge for team morale. So, and then of course, improving as a team, you're addressing your weaknesses, you're building a culture. We'll talk more about that in a second. And team support is huge. But a huge thing is to preserve institutional knowledge. So what that means is that the students who are graduating or even maybe dropping out of Science Olympiad just because, they got too busy or something, they did contribute to the team somehow. And they left behind at least, maybe a sheet of notes at the very least, or a build design, right? How is your team able to preserve that knowledge and pass it down, even between like A and B team? I know there can be competition sometimes, but it's important to remember you're all one, school, and A and B teams can be fluid eventually anyway. So at least in Seven Lakes, we would have like a Google Drive where we would start uploading these things, right? And then as people moved off of events and even graduated, they would just share their folder with people coming after them. So I might skip the suggestion part. We can cover it in Q&A and stuff. But I believe institutional knowledge is very important. That is what helps prevent stagnancy in your team as well, right? So theoretically, if you're always building on previous knowledge, you can't stay in the same place, theoretically. So.
I'd just like to reiterate just how important that point is. I think that's one of the biggest things I noticed with it doesn't just have to do with your event success, it also has to do with how you well. Learning from what you've learned in the past, like a lot of times it is figuring out what these do you actually navigate them, what techniques work, and if you lose that when it moves on, there's no way you can build on it. Like Kevin Lake's comments, Lhasa, Beckendorf, all these really strong teams, it's because there was so much. Oh, we figured out this part of the event. You don't have to waste any more energy. So this is.
Yeah, and if you can, and this is important between coaches as well. We've seen programs fall apart as soon as their star coach left because there was no one who could like fill that gap. That's why it's important to at least maybe have like an assistant coach or like just several teachers who are kind of in the loop as to at least how Science Olympiad works as an institution, how your team dynamics are, so that in the event of a shift in job position or something, or you have to move away, the team doesn't necessarily fall apart. It's important to maintain longevity. So again, we're gonna probably skip past this discussion part, and we can address it in questions and stuff. But the most important part of Science Olympiad, we've been caught in the weeds a little bit about studying and pulling out tests from all across the nation and stuff. But it's so important to just have fun, right? So when you see like kids at Sci Falls like having a frisbee tournament between the awards and the end of the event, that's the fun that is Science Olympiad. When you see kids watching each other's build events and cheering each other on, that's the fun that is Science Olympiad, right? You couple, people say if you love your job, you never work a day in your life, right? So you learn to love STEM now, right? And you go into, and a lot of these students are going to go into STEM as adults. And so this is so important. And I think this is the main idea of Science Olympiad when it got founded in the first place. Let's make science fun. And that's why we have events like Science Word that are, it's explicitly in like the Science Olympiad mission statement to have like some game show style events. And while that is extremely frustrating to some people, it's still supposed to be fun. It's supposed to keep it fun. It's supposed to be accessible even to teams of widely varying experience levels. So, and it's always important to encourage positivity and the growth mindset. Of course, that's fostered by frequent check-ins and asking not just about how people are doing on events, but how they're feeling about their events, how they're feeling about their peers. And to develop a shared vision, right? So you need to make sure that in a cohesive team, the team has the same goal, and that goal should be set at the beginning of each year. What are we going to do this year? We're going to go to regionals and we're going to win it. How about that's like a goal, right? And if everyone buys into that shared vision and it's reiterated every so often, it makes the team all that much stronger.
And one thing I want to point out there is that shared vision doesn't have to be we're going to win it this year. If you have 6 people, that's not a realistic vision. But the realistic vision could be we are going to show improvement in all of our events by the time we're done with this. Or we're each going to add one more thing. I mean, with my educator hat on, students doing science of their own volition on a weekend, we've already won, right? Like the goal has been achieved. But making sure the students have their goal and what they want to get out of it that you support as a coach, I think that's important.
Yeah, so I mean, team chemistry, we know it matters so much. And again, I said I have a personal anecdote. I mean, just 2 years ago, when I was a junior, we were at choosing a state team and even a regional team before that. We decided to put this one kid, call him Bob. Bob's name because his real name was David. And so we'll say David was our helicopters guy. And one thing he could do perfectly was not David, helicopters. So we knew that, or at least we thought, the situation we're planning out our regional team or state team, we knew that without David, we felt like helicopters would be screwed. But David had a bad attitude. He was a cynical kind of guy. And, we took him to state, and in front of the proctor, like, first of all, his first helicopter did a death spiral. And then he was like, oh, it's totally fine. In front of the proctor, he says, that was my SHIT helicopter anyway. We were, like, the whole team was there, and we're like, what does that even mean? Why did you bring that helicopter or run it? We had no clue. And then his second helicopter also did a death spiral. And so a person who was not good for our team dynamic and embarrassed our entire team in front of like the proctor, he was on our state team. And B, helicopters was not like the guaranteed first that it was supposed to be. And yeah, we didn't advance to nationals that year either. So, I mean, it's so important to have people on the team who buy into the vision and who are not cynical. I mean, cynicism really takes away so much from a science. And it's so easy. I feel like engineers, especially, like if you have the future engineers, the ones that are here and stuff, they tend to be the cynical type. But if you can bring out the optimism in people, that's gonna make all the difference. And of course, if you see complacency or stagnancy, it's important to shake things up. So move this kid from picture this onto write it, do it. Maybe switch the builder and the writer and write it, do it. See what happens. I've heard already that random combinations have proven successful in bringing together two people who maybe wouldn't have thought of doing that with earlier. And of course, it's never one person's fault. So while David's helicopter did crash and burn, it wasn't David's fault that we didn't make nationals or we didn't advance to the next spot, because that's a more universal experience. It's the question is like, how did we get here in the first place? It's like when a goal happens in soccer, you don't blame the goalie. You wonder how it got past the defenders and how the midfielders lost possession, right? So how far back can you trace the issues that are facing your team right now? So I feel like that's important for team culture. Anything to add?
No, just like you got to make sure the student, like, I know the teachers, the mentors, the parents, they're not going to blame this one kid, but sometimes the students will like just be annoyed because they've all worked very hard and they might like all get first in something, but then this one person gets like 30th, and that can really mess with a team. And you just need to make sure that everybody going in, like when you're doing recruiting, knows that this is a team effort. This is never one person's fault, and it should always be like a culture of support, not tearing somebody down.
I think that's about all we have for this this slideshow. So y'all can go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, y'all can. So this one we're gonna do. It's
Great job.
Yeah, I thought you guys were doing a great job. Okay. Tommy, I think the food's all good.
He said it was.
Good.
But you can double check.
And do you want me to get drinks at all? I think we should. I'll get some stuff. You don't need me for the next. Okay. Yeah, I'll be back. We'll have to talk to them. Okay. Cool.
and then it's not usually.
That one also is a lot.
Hovercraft. I even more. I went to talk about the national workshop. So I went out there and you had the national hovercraft guy. And the hovercraft went. It's like. Yeah, so you're like, hovercraft was a disaster.
It's gonna be over there. We're gonna do it. But take a bit of stress and we'll send everybody.
We should guys click on is it running still? Last week?
It should be on this page. That looks like a store running.
Oh, because you're
like
doing
dirty.
because you're doing a screen capture of a screen capture.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Is it working? Actually, it's definitely working.
Yep, it's working. All right, so let's end.
Whoever's watching is like, what is going on?
Yeah, let's stop. Stop.